been seeing what's happening in Congo, it has been absolutely devastating to the point where I have felt a little paralyzed in my inability to speak about this issue. So thank you for joining us today. For folks who are like me, very new to this topic and want to know what is happening, give us a sense as to the magnitude of what's happening in Congo right now and how it's related in many ways to these devices that many of us have in our pockets and can't imagine living without.
The starting point for the discussion is most people don't realize that your phone, your computer, anything with a rechargeable battery needs a mineral called cobalt.
Mm.
And the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, has about 85%. Some, people will quibble over the amount, but they have most by far of the world's cobalt. You need cobalt because a lithium ion battery will catch on fire if you don't have cobalt. It regulates the temperature. So it's now very valuable with the boom in EVs and everyone talking about this green revolution of electric vehicles. They're ignoring completely the horrific conditions that miners endure in the Congo to get us this cobalt. I represent children who have been killed and maimed in the cobalt mines because they're sent into these tunnels with no supports, no protective equipment, nothing except a shovel to dig into this loose rock and get this shale-like rock out that contains cobalt. And they fill up these giant sacks and carry them down. I have kids who were killed because a tunnel collapsed on them. I've had kids killed because the floor collapsed in the tunnel and they fell down 50 feet. I have kids who are completely paralyzed because their spines were crushed in these mines. Now, nobody knows much about this because nobody wants you to know about it. And I'm not sounding like somebody paranoid. I went there and it literally blew my mind when I interviewed a room full of maimed children who are mining cobalt for all the big companies. Apple, Tesla, Google, Microsoft, and Dell are the companies we sued for their responsibility for these children being killed and maimed.
Mm. I've seen Attorney Collingsworth video of what looks like thousands of people on a mountainside, thousands of people in a mining community, and then you zoom in and you realize how many of them are children. And regardless of the age, to me, give it the sense of the working conditions are absolutely tragic. You mentioned just a number of the incidences that have befallen a number of your clients, but for those who have not perhaps suffered a physical death, what are the conditions that they are laboring under Monday on any day ending in Y, basically?
Exactly. Um, well, first of all, it's hot, it's dirty. There is not only dust from the cobalt, but the other minerals that are mixed in, and it causes respiratory problems. And most of them are working for about $1 a day. Now, most Americans will, sort of react and say, "Oh, that must be fine over there in the Congo," but it's not. That's not enough to eat. That's not enough to live well. They live in hovels. It's a horrible condition, and their communities are being polluted by the mining operations because all of the waste materials are put into the river and there's now polluted water. The air is horrible. It is a real tragedy. And then the reason that it's happening, the $1 trillion companies that brag to their shareholders, we're $1 trillion company, Apple, Tesla, all of these companies, and they're doing nothing about it. And I want to stress that they have not done a thing. They all claim that they have policies, zero tolerance policies against child labor. But I went there. Everyone who goes there and looks at it is their minds are blown by how bad it is, how many kids are working, how many adults are working under horrible conditions. So these $1 trillion companies, they could go there and fix this. They could put cameras 24/7 to make sure the conditions are safe for the workers that they desperately need for this cobalt, but they're doing nothing. I sued them and they're arguing in court that they have nothing to do with this. They don't even know where the Congo is. They're just buying cobalt, but their policies that they put on their website are trying to assure consumers that don't worry, we've got a zero tolerance policy. And that's very typical for multinational corporations in their supply chains. I
Yeah.
also represent kids in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire that are slaves harvesting cocoa for all the big chocolate companies. It is a horrible thing going on right in Africa today. And people will dress it up and call it modern day slavery. No, it's good old fashioned slavery. These people don't have a choice. They're working under desperate conditions not to starve.
My God. You said you mentioned Ghana and that I know gave me pause because I have this sort of mythology in my mind that Ghana is like the great place of return. Are you telling us that there is also slave labor conditionings happening in nations as advanced, quote unquote, and I'm putting that in air quotes. I hate the word advanced nation. But are you suggesting that or letting us know that there's also slave labor even in a nation like Ghana?
Absolutely. I represent children in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire that are working for Nestle, Mars, Hershey, Cargill, that
My
are
God.
harvesting cocoa. Some of them are trafficked from Mali and Burkina Faso, and all of them are working under desperate, poor conditions for these giant corporations. I was just there in Ghana in the end of November, and there's a bunch of photos on the website of my organization where people can go and see what's happening right now. There's a CBS News clip from the trip to Ghana. They came with me and filmed children working in for Mars and Mandalay and Cargill. It's yeah, nobody knows this. And how can we compete with their billion-dollar advertising budgets and educate the public? Well, thank you for having me on today. We're going to start educating station by station, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's pause a bit and let's break this down just a little bit. Let's go back to the Democratic Republic of Congo. What is happening in the geopolitical relationship between the governance of that country and countries where these corporations are headquartered that is allowing for this? Has the government taken any meaningful action against this? What's the nature of governance in Democratic Republic of Congo that might allow for these sort of conditions to persist?
In one word, corruption.
Mm.
There have been a series of presidents in the DRC that have left office with giant Swiss bank accounts, and the tradition continues. From the highest level to the lowest level, there is no enforcement of the laws, which they do have on the books. They have mining laws. They have a law against child labor. In fact, if you read it, it's a pretty good law. You're not supposed to be doing any dangerous work if you're under the age of 18.
Mm.
And it's so the law is there. They're just not enforcing it. And the mining companies are enjoying their ability to pay off the companies. Sorry, the politicians. One of the companies is called Glencore. It's one of the largest mining companies in the world. It's Swiss based. They just pled guilty to Foreign Corrupt Practices Act violations in both the United States and the United Kingdom for their bribery of officials in the Congo, including in the cobalt mining areas. So it's not just me making the accusation. It's very well documented. And you said you saw some pictures. Anyone who goes there will see shocking, obvious examples of abusive conditions of workers. Some of them are children. And if I can see it, I'm white. I can't sneak up on many people over there. But if I was able to see it out in the open, then it is no secret to the local officials who aren't enforcing the law.
Mm. Where does our nation, the governance of our nation, what is the United States officially saying about this? What are we in terms of our foreign policy? What is our contribution to this reality?
Well, our government has at least a left hand and a right hand problem. It probably many more problems than that. But the US Department of Labor every year will publish a report that identifies products that are made in whole or in part with child labor, for example. And they identify the DRC and Cobalt as one of those products. So it's there in the official government record. But at
Mm.
the same time, this administration in particular, they want to have EVs on the road, hell or high water. And
Right.
so they're ignoring this problem in order to advance that agenda. And I have written to just about everybody in the government who I could get an address for or an email or something to raise the alarm that this is not a green revolution if the
Mm.
foundation for it is abuse of the miners in the DRC, many of whom are children. This is not a clean industry if it
Wow.
is powered by what we call blood cobalt.
That's
The
right.
New York Times, for example, they had several days of front page reporting on the China scare. Like, oh my goodness, China's buying up all the mines. What are we going to do about that? And not once, at least in the articles I read, did they mention that, by the way, there's some other issues going on here, but they don't give a damn about those people
Mm.
in the Congo. That's the problem.
Yeah. There's this thing that happens when you talk to people in the current era, when we look back in history and we say, well, if I were alive during the civil rights movement, I would have been a freedom marcher. Or if I were alive during the such and such movement, I would have been working the Underground Railroad. And the response to that often is, well, what are you doing right now? Because whatever you're doing right now is pretty indicative of what you would have been doing back then. And the idea of taking on what feels to me like a non-transit, it's an African slave trade. I was trying to, because we have the transatlantic slave trade, we understand what that means when we're talking about these issues, but when it comes to something as massive as this, there's no popular discourse, there's no discussion of an underground railroad, there's no discussion of organizing neighboring countries to help come in and do some of the work. What are the organizers and activists on the ground in DRC? How are they organizing around this? Because my question is, do I get rid of my phone? I can do that. Do I not get another Apple Watch? There's a new Apple phone coming out later this year. Do we not, how do we, one, hear from the organizers who are on the ground there and what they're doing? And then two, what behavioral patterns can we engage in here? What organizing efforts can we engage in here or support from here that would help to make a dent in this? Because if you're talking about Apple, Tesla, these corporations, they see dollars, they speak dollars, they understand dollars, and that's what they care about. So I just need to know what it looks like on the ground for organizers there, and we can start with that. But then I also need us to understand what is our responsibility and obligation in this country, sitting pretty on these phones and devices in order to respond meaningfully to what is slavery.
Yes, thank you. Great questions. Starting with what's going on the ground in the Congo. Not much, because it's extremely dangerous for activists who are speaking out and taking on the combined power of the
Mm.
government and these trillion-dollar corporations. The guy that helped me in the Congo meet the families, he's a local organizer. I'm not going to even mention his name because he's still
Yeah.
endangered. We were so careful with our security in terms of when I met the children and the families and so on. But the last night I was in Kolwezi, which is the mining center in
Mm.
the Congo, I went out to dinner with my local contact. Someone saw us, and they just probably noticed that there was this person, me, who doesn't look like they're from around there, and they knew who my contact was. When we filed that case, uh, instantly our contact received death threats. His kids were threatened, and they moved to Zambia for about 8 weeks to just wait for the heat to go down. And he still is under threat there. So
Mm.
that's what happens if you're an activist making trouble for the mining companies and for the government. So that's a real problem. And there is another group that I can name publicly called Afro Watch. They worked with Amnesty International and did two extremely wonderful reports documenting the blood cobalt supply chains. And for some, I don't know how they're managing to still stay open and safe, but they're doing some great work exposing the problems.
Mm.
But the reason we filed our case in the US is because you really couldn't do it there. Anyone involved in directly challenging this power would be in trouble. So what we do here, and if you go to our website, internationalrightsadvocates.org, all one word, internationalrightsadvocates.org, we have something where you can click on it and send a message to each of the companies directly and say you're not going to buy any of their products again until they stop doing this. That's one thing a consumer can do, is take the time to let these people know, because they only care about the bottom line,
Right.
that you're not going to buy their products until they fix this problem. And I think Apple, Tesla, Microsoft, Google, and Dell in particular, they all have audience, customer base that are younger people that should care
Right.
about this, that should really be up in arms about this. And they're not. I mean, I know that when we publicize our work, we'll get a lot of likes on YouTube or a lot of likes on TikTok for our work. But I don't think people are doing much more than that. So that's our one call to action: is take the time to let them know that this is not accept. It's not even remotely acceptable for $1 trillion company to be profiting from slavery in Africa today.
Mm.
And the other thing we ask people to do is, we are spearheading litigation against these companies. We're taking on these giant $1 trillion companies from our seat here in the small human rights NGO. There's an opportunity to donate to our litigation fund so that we can take them to court and hold them accountable, which is what we're trying to do.
And it's not, I need people to understand, it's not just you file a lawsuit and then you prosecute the lawsuit. You're filing a lawsuit against $1 trillion companies that have more lawyers than perhaps people in the nation, or have access to more lawyers than you can imagine. And even if the lawyers know they're on the wrong side of the issue, they can delay. They can employ every single tactic. They can afford depositions. They can afford to drag out discovery. They can afford to make the interrogatories, and they can afford to make this as slow as possible. Meanwhile, your life years are waning as you're just spending your time working and doing the work. And that's often what happens, folks, when it comes to taking on these giants. The David and Goliath imagery is beautiful, but it's not nearly as fast as slinging a slingshot and popping a rock off in the giant's head. You really have to engage in the work, and it requires resources. It really, truly does. And I'm wondering if you can give us a sense as to the position of the cases that you filed here. And keep in mind, he said he had to file them here because there were no courts accessible or that would able to manage this sort of process where the crime is happening, even though I guess we can say the crime is happening on an international scale, considering those companies are reaping profits here. What's the current position of the case that you filed on behalf of the children that you represent?
Well, when we filed the case here in federal court in Washington, D.C., we unfortunately drew a brand new Trump appointee,
Oh,
Judge Carl Nichols, who we later found out had investments in all of these companies. Some were direct, and some were through a mutual fund that only invested in tech, and they listed all the companies except Dell as their primary uh,
wow.
investment sites. So he threw the case out almost immediately. So we went on appeal, and we just got a decision about 2 weeks ago that was not terrific. The court said that our clients had standing to sue, which is the constitutional barrier to getting into court. They said we had that, but we used a statute called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and it applies to forced and trafficked labor. And
Mm.
we alleged, and we can prove, that most of these kids were trafficked and they were also forced to work. The gateway term in the statute is that the companies, let's say Tesla, has to be in a venture. The word is venture, with the mining company that is directly abusing the children. We had a very loose factual allegation about that relationship because we don't get discovery until after we win that first round, the motion to dismiss. So we didn't have a lot of information about the contractual relationship between the companies and the mines. The court issued a decision that said we had not met what they think a venture requires, and they defined what venture is. And it's sort of fair enough. If I'd have known that before we filed the case, I could have done something different. But as we speak today, my team is in the Congo gathering the facts that we'll need to amend the complaint and file on behalf of new people to get the case back going again. And we're going to do that swiftly. I would say within 30, maximum 60 days, we'll be back in action. And we're sending a message to these companies that we never quit. That's the reputation of my organization. There's always a way to keep going. You're right. Your point. I can't keep doing this forever. I'm getting to be a senior citizen, but I've got a bunch of young lawyers working with me, and we're quite optimistic about where we'll end up in this case. And the message, again, we keep pounding, and we're going to pound them again in the court, is Tesla, Apple, you can't have it both ways. You don't have a policy that is zero tolerance and then claim you have no idea where the Congo is. Do
Mm.
something about this, and I'd like not to be suing you again.
Yeah, yeah. You know, what's interesting is at $1 trillion, they could They could pay living wages. They could pay wages in abundance, and still come away with trillions of dollars. Like there's no reason for this other than the fact that this is a population that is largely considered expendable, and I think that has a lot to do with the history of race and racism and devaluation of people from this region in particular. And we've got what we're like 500 years now into affiliating or associating the continent of Africa and the people within it with slavery. And these are the, if you're going to colonize, this is where you're going to colonize. And it feels to me like as much as we have had an ending to what we understand properly as the transatlantic slave trade, the inherent tools, the inherent elements of slavery are still exactly what is happening. It's not. I don't see a difference, Attorney Collingsworth. I'm trying to find a difference, and I'm not seeing one other than the fact that they're not being transported on ships, but they're certainly being smuggled across borders. They're certainly being trafficked in a whole host of other ways. It just feels as though the world has decided that this is the population. If you're going to do it, this is the place to do it, and this is the group to do it with.
Absolutely. And there's a fantastic book called King Leopold's Ghost that
Yes.
is about the history of the Congo and the exploitation of King Leopold's when he had basically a private colony in the Congo. And I feel in our lawsuit, the complaint is on our website too. We have several paragraphs referring back to King Leopold's Ghost as a source and the history of the Congo, because this is a continuation of that history.
Mm.
Leopold got first, he was getting ivory and then rubber, latex from the Congo. So he used his local people as slaves. Then the slave trade, we needed some labor over here, so they had the Atlantic slave trade, and now we're back to exploiting the resources of this African nation that has, by the way, the Congo should be the richest country in the world because
Right.
they have more minerals than any other country. They have diamonds, gold, cobalt, tin, you name it, it's there. And the
Mm.
people are getting none of it because of corruption and then the willingness of the West to exploit that opportunity.
How are neighboring countries responding to this? Obviously, this is happening in the DRC, but there have to be ripple effects in border nations and in other nations that are in the region. What's been their collective response to what's happening there?
Well, they're certainly not helping. I think they're more complaining about refugees coming over from the Congo. And
Wow.
then, as you know, the civil conflict is flaring up again and making it a dangerous place on top of the place where people are exploited. So I don't see any real hope for that region in the near future, except if there's a massive intervention of resources from the companies that are benefiting from the wealth of the Congo right now.
Hmm.
As you pointed out, if these companies, instead of saying, what can we get away with, said, how can we help these people who we have benefited from getting
Right.
us this cobalt and many other minerals, how can we help? And they could help by ending the corruption. They could help by making these good jobs. I remember the history of the mine workers here in the United States. It
Right.
was a dirty, dangerous job that people who had no other options were stuck with until they unionized. It's still dangerous and can be
Right.
dirty, but the wages make it worth it. People choose to do that because it is a good paying job and it's an honest way to make a living. That's what we need to see happen in the Congo.
Considering what you said just a moment ago, that Congo should be the richest nation on the planet just by resources alone, the lack of vision or the myopic view of seeing this population of people as the slaves of the world when they could be the wealthiest population and in a way that could everyone could benefit. Like this does not have to be. It does not have to be that you have an entire industry based on slave labor. And I'm wondering, not even am I going to go ahead and sign on to this, the feature that you have on the website that lets these companies know how I feel about it. I'm also thinking about how I need to perhaps change my habits and my practices because I was, kind of excited about the new iPhone coming out until I started seeing these images. Should we be buying refurbished phones? Should we, like, what can our, in addition to signing on and letting these corporations know, and I'm going to encourage you, audience, you need to be using the 5 Calls app. You need to be contacting your elected officials. I want hearings about this. I want Congress to be investigating. Why is it that these international corporations, which are based here in these United States, why is it that they're able to engage in slave labor? If I were a competing company, I'd want to know, how come you get this leg up? You get to have access to slave labor and I have to actually pay workers a living wage. There should be hearings about this. But should I also be changing my consumption patterns? I'm seeing some folks in one of our show chats saying they're no longer consuming chocolate as much, or they're being intentional about which chocolate brands they secure. What is the consumer's obligation if they've got a heart and if they care? In addition to signing on and making those demands, should we be also changing our purchasing patterns?
Yeah, thank you for that. A couple of comments. One, there's a phone in Europe called Fairphone that they're working on, and that it will someday be available in the U.S. market, but it's not right now. So we're hoping that there will be an alternative for phones, and then hopefully computers will follow. And if you ask people who are barely doing anything to do something really tough, that's not going to happen. And
Yeah.
so what I'm asking people to do is really what I'm doing. I'm not going to let them cripple my ability to work by not having a computer or not having a phone. I need those to take them on. I'm not buying anything new until they fix this. So that's the message I think is a reasonable message to send. I'm not going to get that new iPhone. I got a really old one, and I'm hoping it hangs on for a bit longer while we're waiting for the fair phone. That's one thing. And then, yes, our Congress is dysfunctional by any measure right now.
True.
But look at what they'll have hearings on whether some rich kid in California is being unfairly influenced by social media. Oh
Right.
my God, what a tragedy that is. Did you think about the fact that this social media platform that they're looking at is on a phone that is got cobalt mined by children in Congo? Let's view that as a higher priority than whether our spoiled population is being impacted by social media posts. I mean,
Right.
I'm not saying that's not a problem. Certainly, there are kids who are depressed and they need help, of course. But if you're asking me which is more important,
Mm.
slavery is more
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Let's call it what it is.